Another week of fantasy footy is in the can, and there are some pretty big trades that you and I need to look at for this upcoming week of AFL Fantasy. Some guys are popping, some guys are doing anything but that. But who are the trade targets this week in AFL Fantasy? Great question. Straight out of the gate. This is a guy that if you haven't got him yet, time is ticking. It is almost too late. Xavier Lindsay is my number one trade target for you yet again this week. Looked really good against North Melbourne, despite the rest of his team not doing so. This is a serious footballer. Keeper and Dynasty League owners, get your hands on him now. But pushing that price point of $450,000 already, a negative break even, the fact that he's only in a quarter of the competition of teams is criminal, where team value is critical at this point in time. If you've got guys like an Ollie Hollands, for example, that you're desperate to get out of, this is the pathway player that you need to be looking into. He'll be up at 600,000 really quick. And if he keeps hitting this 80-90 territory, my goodness me, you don't want to miss on him. So to me, Xavier Lindsay is the number one player to trade into this week. Who's my number two guy? I'm not as confident on this one, but I think the fact on his scoring, and just the break even of where he sits, and he's in a line that we do need this outlet option. I think I could put him in there. Okay. It's Max Hall as a mid forward, over $330,000 now. Again, has that negative break even and ownership perspective. Still only about 1 in every 3 teams has him. So to me, this is the outlet play. If you've tried a Sam Wicks and it's failed, he's your pathway. If you're ready to jump out of a Riley Sanders, take the extra 300 odd K and put it on top of another player, Max Hall is a way to get there. I think the thing that concerns me about Max, while the scoring was okay this last week against Geelong, not as good as the Crows match up in round 1, but still okay. I think the thing that concerns me about it is the clear volatility that under a Ross Lyon coach team, they're happy to throw players in and out of the side with just one poor performance. Now, St Kilda won. That bodes well for him not only playing this week, but Garcia copped the sub. There's a lot of volatility in this team while they're clearly trying to identify who's in their best lineup structurally. So I think you can make the trade into a Max Hall, but I wouldn't say I'm doing it with high confidence. I'm doing it with more necessity than anything else. There might even be others that I'd probably prioritize more than it. But if you're looking to trade into any forward cash cow, anyone under that $400,000 price point now in fantasy that you need to alleviate that cash, again, jumping off a Wicks, jumping off some other debt options, or a Sanders and a Garcia that you're like, that's it, I just want to get out. Hall's the guy that, at least from a money-making perspective over the next couple of weeks, probably is the best outlet option to do so. But if I was looking at job security, I'd probably look at my third option, and that's an Elijah Hewett. Maybe not as much of a fast, accelerated money mover, but to me, I think there's something pretty spectacular about this guy as a player. He dished out another low 50s for us this week, missed a couple of shots on goal that, based on at least what I've seen him do at the AFL level and juniors level, I think I'd probably say are more missable kicks for him than they are difficult kicks. But mid-forward, over $350,000. The break-even doesn't scream making massive amount of money, which means you probably, another 50, drops another 20, 30K. He's still an attainable price point. Even next week, if you've got other burning house issues, he'll still be under 400,000 next week, barring a monster score. But only 1 in 4 coaches have their hands on this guy. I think he's another one that I'd really consider. Again, maybe you already own Max Hall and Sanders. You're like, well, I've got McRae, I've got Daniel, I've got Bailey Smith, I've got Rankin. Who else am I going to? And I understand that narrative and that thought process. So Hewett's there in a week if you need, but if you're a Hall owner and still want to get into the forward rooks, this is probably a play to look at in terms of, I think he's got good job security and relative scoring consistency. And those are two things we do want to have in our rookies. My fourth best moneymaker and trade-in option for you this week is a Mitch Knevitt. Single-digit break-even, already over that $500,000 price point. My concern, just to deviate thoughts for a second, is when a player scores as well as he is in AFL Fantasy and not in SuperCoach, I do have a little red flag going in the back of my mind that tells me that as good as he may be from a fantasy perspective, the impact in the actual game itself, which SuperCoach gives a bit more of a truer reflection to, just has me a little hesitant, is all I'm going to say. But that said, over 500K, 91 average, single digit break even, and less than 10% of the competition own him at time of recording. This has been a knockout pick, and credit to everybody that's on it, because again, if he keeps going this 80-90 sort of territory for another 2 to 3 weeks, we are looking at a guy that will make 300,000 for you and be a on-field counting your best 18 score. So an awesome selection if you're on Mitch Knevitt. This, I think, is the last week you can get on him. And I think it's a great selection, plain and simple. Now, whether or not you'd choose him over my next guy, I think they're kind of 4A, 4B. But Knevitt's doing some pretty incredible stuff at the moment. And I really like what I've seen from him. The fifth option, again, some might say 4A, 4B. I'd probably say 4A, 4B, but is a Nathan O'Driscoll. Again, a little bit cheaper, about 20,000 cheaper, not as good as a break even, but feels like he's a little bit more bulletproof in terms of in 2-3 weeks' time when some of their A1 choice options come back into the side. He feels a bit more bulletproof in that regard, but fantastic ball user, the best kick at Fremantle. And they've got some decent weapons in this side when you consider a Hayden Young is still to come back into this side. Just penetrating kick. Didn't play as much inside mid this week as he did last week, and yet still found a way to score really, really well. If you can't quite get up to Knevitt, very happy for you to get into this. Again, a fieldable guy in best 18, giving us 80-plus sort of scores most weeks. Love what I'm getting out of Noddy. Yes, Mini Monk has not appeared despite me mentioning Noddy's name 3 times, but Nathan O'Driscoll, very happy to have my hands on this as a selection. Would you like 3 more names that are a little bit at a cheaper price point? Let's give you a defender. Let's give you something in the forward line. And let's give you something in the mids. If you are looking to trade down to a rookie-priced option in your back line, maybe you're just frustrated with a Perryman, this is a downward option. And the reason I think it's a consideration for a Perryman type, or again, you've already got the trainer Reed prior, but you want something that's a bit more fieldable for you that could pop into your ideal best 18 scenarios for the next couple of weeks. Connor O'Sullivan is a name that probably should be getting more attention than he is. Priced just over that $350,000 price point. Delivered a decent score for us last week. The injury to Tom Stewart, who looks like he'll be out now for a couple of weeks, just meant that he was structurally even more critical to Geelong this week. Single-digit ownership, break-even is really clearly attainable. But I could see another 5 or 6 weeks of 50, 60 plus sort of scores for him, given how Geelong moved that ball around that back line quite well. Really good interceptor of the ball. I think this is a great selection. Again, maybe it's a Perryman down because you want to take a Ollie Hollands all the way up to something. Maybe you want to get into a Rankin, and the way you're going to choose to do that is via a Sanders, and the extra cash of Perryman to an O'Sullivan kind of gets you there. To me, I just think he's an option you should be considering. Is it ahead of a Lindsay? No, of course it's not. I wouldn't be going out of my way to do it, but rather if this is the avenue outlet of how to get there, I think this is a great play. It's a better pick in the other formats for what I'm happy to tell you. But for AFL Fantasy, if you need a downgrade in your backline, he is someone. If you're looking for another mid option, we've got that as my last suggestion. But as a forward, Tyrell Dewar, I thought he was really impressive on the weekend against Brisbane. Now, whether or not that's his ceiling score for the year, I'm not too sure. But under 400,000, negative break even, 1% of the comp own Tyrell. He had a really nice role on the weekend. He's not just a forward stuck inside forward 50. He's pushing up. He's a part of this midfield core too. And he's doing something on the outside with his skill set that I really like from a West Coast Eagles perspective. Now, I've clearly got Hall and Hewett as guys that are ahead of him, given they're both cheaper. But if you need a 2-week hit, well, Dewar should score and score more money, that is, ahead of a Hewett. Does always have a little bit of vest concern about how West Coast are changing and chopping so much. But yeah, look, it's a play. Maybe you've got Hall, maybe you've got Hewett, and you're still desperate to get out of Sanders, desperate to get out of Wicks, desperate for another option that sits in that spot. He's under 400k, negative break even, had a good score against the best team in the league last year. I think it's an option for you. And then the last name I'm going to give you, so these are 8 trade-in targets for you, is a Jack Henderson. It's the lowest of all my priorities because I think if you are trading in and around this 300,000 range, you've got to go and get your hands on Lindsay at 25%. Look, you'd notice I haven't put guys like Ashcroft in there because he's over 50% owned. So we're clearly talking about the minority that have the need for him. And of course, he'd move up higher priority. But to me, if you've got Knevitt, if you've got O'Driscoll, if you've got Lindsay, if you've got Ashcroft, and you still need your hands on another mid, Jack's got the role. The fact he hasn't been the sub is promising over the last couple of weeks. 54 average is solid, minus break even. Decent role in the team too. I do feel like changes are coming to this Melbourne side. Whether or not that is his job security or his scoring, I'm not as certain about the job security being the concern. The scoring, clearly something's not quite working for Melbourne just yet this year, but he's an option. Top priority? No, but if you've got all those other mid that I reckon are better cash money movers and you still need another one, then Jack sits in there. But what are your AFL fantasy trades this week? What dumpster fires are you dealing with? Who's the mid-pricer that's really let you down? Maybe that top-end premium that just hasn't popped just yet. Brayshaw, I'm looking at you. Would love to know. Comment below if you're watching this on YouTube. What are your trades for this week? We'll get back in touch with you as best as we possibly can. We've got a SuperCoach episode of this also coming for you. Now we can finally give that to you. A bit of a chaotic week last week, but we'll do you a SuperCoach trade priorities episode. And then, of course, Tuesday night, the strategy session will help you through all the big dilemmas you've got to make this week. Hey, thanks so much for tuning in, whether you're watching on YouTube or you're listening on the audio podcast platform. We're so thankful that you do that. Make sure you give us a 5-star as an audio podcast. Give this episode a like if you're watching on YouTube, and we'll be back with you again real soon with another episode here on the channel, helping you with your AFL Fantasy, SuperCoach, and fantasy football sides in 2025.